You are listening to the Human Care Podcast, part of the Invisible, Not Broken podcast network. I'm your host, Eva Minkoff. This podcast features conversations with health entrepreneurs, care professionals, patient advocates, and industry changemakers. What do they all have in common? The mission to humanize healthcare. In every episode, we offer unique stories paired with education, actionable tips, tricks, and takeaways, all to help you better navigate healthcare and transform it into human care. Yay. I'm so happy to be here with you today. It was wonderful to have you on Invisible, Not Broken. This past summer? I don't understand time anymore.
Over a year ago. Yeah.
Was it over a year ago?
Crazy. I mean, time is nuts.
Wow. Oh, it was over a year ago. Oh, man. That's blowing my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday
Time
was
flies.
March 11th. Did you take note of yesterday?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's when all hell broke loose.
Yep. I'm kind of dreading the day, to be honest. And it's actually a very positive day for me. My husband proposed to me on that day 4 years ago. And
well, that is awesome.
It's my parents' third wedding anniversary, as in their third wedding. So
that's cool.
I'm responsible for that one, long story short. But yeah, so March 11th, I've always loved. And then last year, the WHO declared a pandemic on that day. So I was like, okay, I can see in my future, I'm not going to love this day as much.
Hopefully several years from now, you can start loving it again.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. I'm very sentimental, so we'll see how it goes. But anyway, I would like to properly introduce you because you, at the very least, deserve a proper introduction. Really, I can't say enough how excited I am to have this conversation with you, because talking to you, whether it be on Invisible Not Broken or just catching up, even some like emailing we've done, you are consistently an inspiring woman, inspiring person. In the world of healthcare and chronic illness, and just in general. I kind of wish everyone had a little bit of Clorinda in them.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
But sincerely, okay, everyone. Clorinda Walley is the president of the Good Days charity, which funds medical expenses for those with chronic conditions. Clorinda has over 20 years of experience in the healthcare industry and over 12 years in strategic philanthropy. As a member of the chronic illness community herself, Clorinda has ulcerative colitis, migraines, Hashimoto's disease, arthritis, endometriosis, clotting disorder, and ADHD. As I like to say, when it rains, it pours, unfortunately. Yeah.
I think I was like, spin the wheel and see which one it lands on.
Yeah, for real. I can't believe I only have 3. I might have more than 3. Okay, right. So Clorinda is also one of 13 siblings, which, despite me knowing her for a while, I just learned that today. Mm-hmm. And many of her siblings also have chronic conditions like Raynaud's, Sjogren, psoriasis, and there's like a whole list. So in short, living with and caring for people in this community has been her entire life. And now Clorinda has made it her mission through Good Days to promote preventional medicine, given that so many of our chronic conditions are in fact preventable, or at least well managed through healthy lifestyles and attention to well-being. Mm-hmm. Clorinda's illness journey has taught her how to care, how to caregive, and how to be a voice for those suffering with chronic disease. And today we will be touching on her experience as a patient, as an advocate, but also as a mother, wife, and caregiver herself. So, Clorinda, as I said, very happy to have you back now on the Human Care. Okay. So, as I mentioned, you were on the Invisible Not Broken podcast before, but now we're the Human Care podcast, and I would really love for you to share your quote unquote chronic illness story with us, because it really is pretty profound.
Absolutely. Well, so I'll start. I have 3 sons. So when I was pregnant with the third son, I started feeling bad. So before this point, I had never been sick. No antibiotics, no cold. I mean, I had migraines, but no illness that ever really required medication. And so I'm pregnant with who is now Jackson, and I think I have a sinus infection. I know this is going to sound nutty, but I was like, there's something wrong with me. So I called my sister and I'm like, I think there's something really wrong with me. And she was like, why? I'm like, I have a sinus infection. Oh, this is before I even knew I was pregnant, by the way. And so she was like, well, maybe, we were going through all of these things, but I'm like, buddy, it's not like me to be sick. And so I go to the doctor, get on an antibiotic. And so I'm still feeling off. And she was like, well, you should probably just take a pregnancy test. I'm like, oh, it's not possible for me to be pregnant. Well, sure enough, I was. So then I was like, okay, well, maybe this is it. This when you're pregnant, I think that your immunity somehow changes. So I'm going through this pregnancy and I'm still not feeling right. Like I'm off, and I can't pinpoint exactly what is wrong. Well, I have Jackson in July, and after that, my health really started deteriorating. I was losing a lot of weight. I felt very tired, like emotionally off. And I'd never had emotional struggles before. So I'm like, there's got to be something wrong. I go to the emergency room because I'm really thinking, okay, what's going on with me? And they're like, oh, you're just anemic. You need to take children's vitamins. And they send me on my way. I'm getting sicker and sicker. I'm getting so thin, and I have ulcerative colitis. So part of those symptoms are also, you can't control when you have to go to the restroom. Well, I can't eat or drink anything without that being stimulated. And so I'm losing a ton of weight. What I didn't realize is I'm also losing a lot of blood. My illness starts really progressing. My hands start curling in. At the time, I'm working for a specialty pharmacy, and I am actually in the process of transitioning to work for Good Days. And fortunate for me, the founder of the organization has Crohn's disease. So I start working for him, and I'm talking to him about, these symptoms that I'm having. And he's like, I think you have Crohn's disease. He's like, I went through something similar. I'm still going to hospital, like emergency rooms, because I'm feeling so bad. And again, you're just anemic. And so eventually I go to see a gastroenterologist, and still not on the right track. Still no real diagnosis. Mike connects me with the doctor's offices that he used, and he's like, I really think you should go, visit this practice. They're really good. They will keep searching, even if it doesn't come to them immediately. Well, that visit is scheduled, let's just say, for next week. Well, it's Monday now. My feet are curled in, my wrists are curled in. Like, I don't know what to do. I go back to the emergency room. Again, they send me home and say, there's nothing wrong with me. Well, I mean, there's something wrong with me, obviously. So that Friday, again, when I'm driving, I have to drive with my wrist because I can't use my hands. I can't use my feet. It was just the craziest thing. I'm still going to work every day. That Friday, I just decided I'm going to this doctor's office, a doctor who hadn't seen me before, but I had my appointment next week. And so I just go to the front desk, and to this day, I still feel really bad for the lady who greeted me, because I just start crying, and I'm like, there's something wrong with me. I don't have an appointment. Please don't send me away. I just need somebody to help. And so she was like, well, your doctor's on vacation, so let me see what I can do. So she goes back, and this angel of a physician comes out, and he's like, he comes and he walks me to a patient's room. And again, I don't have an appointment with them. And he was like, let me take your temperature. And so he takes my temperature, and he was like, well, you have a fever. I want to admit you. And their doctor's office happened to be in a hospital. So he just makes this phone call. The next thing you know, I am taken into a room. Like, I'm actually going to get looked at. which was pretty exciting for me. You know, I was scared. I was in pain. It was all these things. And then, by the way, Jackson isn't even a year old. He's just a baby. And so, like, through all of this thing, you know, I have these children. And so, Abe, I kind of mentioned this to you before. So you don't realize how, I don't know, like, intuitive children are. So, and, you know, they were at the time less than 1. Jackson was 3 and Brandon was 6. And, you know, I look back on it now and, you know, I think, you know, it's unfortunate, but it's also amazing at the same time. Is, you know, what, growing up when I was a child, death never occurred to me. I never, the thought of my mom dying, never in my head. And now you have the 6-year-old who's processing that he might lose his mother. Like, you know, how do you prepare a little boy for something like that? And I think to this day that has something to do with he's always been a grown up. And unfortunately, I think that it stems from having to be a grown up when you're 6 years old, having to deal with grown up thoughts and grown up feelings at 6 years old. So I go through this. I'm in the hospital. They're running tests. Oh, and by the way, when they do the initial assessment in my room, I have no elevated temperature. Gone. From 1 hour to the next, I took nothing. So I honestly believe that was God's intervention in putting me in a place to seek help. So, you know, they're doing all these tests. Then the next thing you know, and by the way, I'm there myself. My husband's at work. He doesn't know I'm in the hospital. I don't tell my mom because she's the one that takes care of my kids. And like, I don't want her scared. I don't want them scared, like that something is going on. So the next thing you know, I get like 5 physicians coming in with like a crash cart. And they're like, we have to do emergency surgery. So your red blood count has to be at a certain number. Mine was at a 3. I'd lost so much blood. They had no idea how to even survive. Oh, and by the way, I had 2 blood clots on each side of my hip. And so they were like, okay, we can't give you blood thinners. We can't give you a blood transfusion. And we don't, you know, you're in jeopardy of dying like anytime if these blood clots move. So immediately, and I'm like, holy cow. So I call my sister, one of the 8, and I was just like, okay, I just got admitted in the hospital. Apparently I have blood clots. They don't know how I'm still living, but they have to do emergency surgery and I'm being pulled back now. And so this sister calls all of the other sisters and somehow, I mean, they're 20 minutes away from me. While I'm being wheeled back. And so what they were going to do is what they did is they put a stent in my vena cava. It's kind of like a tiny, tiny little metal spider. They stick it down in your vein and it pops open and it kind of clips on. So any blood clots that come through, it breaks them up. So as I'm being wheeled back, here are my sisters. And you know, you don't know how important a support community is until you need it. And so, you know, they come willing, they're all there. And you know, this was it. And oh, and I failed to mention this. I'm sorry, as I go back. While I'm waiting to get wheeled back, the doctor comes in and he says, well, you may not make it. So I would advise you to write a letter to your sons. Tell them whatever you want them to know, because you may not see them again. Holy cow. It's like, how do you deal with that? I'm in my 30s. I have this little baby who I barely know. Like, I don't know what his personality is. Is he going to be funny? Is he going to be sarcastic? You know, like, who is this little boy? And so then I first start by writing a letter to Brandon, who's the oldest. And I talk to him about all the things that I'm proud of him for, my hopes for him for the future. And, you know, for him to always know that I love him, but also to like talk to his brothers, Jackson, about me. And so then I write a letter to Preston. And, you know, he was always just so funny, and I didn't want him to lose that spirit. And I didn't want this to change who they were. I didn't want them to become bitter or to become depressed. So I'm telling him this in this letters, and then poor little Jackson, I don't really know who he is. I mean, he's this great little bundle of happiness, but he can't talk yet. I can't talk to him. So I kind of just write him a letter of who I think he will be in the future. And so then I get willed back. But I mean, these are like some crazy emotional things that are going on. So I come out, I survive, I'm here, obviously. They put the stent in, and through that whole transition, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. While in the hospital, I got put on heavy steroids. And so you talk about interactions. So you have some really good providers, and then you have some that are not as sensitive as they probably should be. Well, my hands clearly cannot open. And so like one of the memories that stick out to me is a nurse would come in, and I had to have so many IVs, like they're taking blood and giving me medicine, and every vein I had, I think. Well, for some reason, they couldn't get a needle into this vein. So they were trying to put it somewhere like through my hand or through my wrist. Well, I kept saying I can't open my hands. So the nurse went to force them open. And talk about pain and insensitivity. I'm like, and I just scream, and I'm like, you can't, they don't open. So anyway, eventually the steroids worked. And I kind of call steroids the miracle drug that will eventually kill you. Because it seems like it can cure everything, but it's just a mask. It's a cover up of what's really going on. And through this time, when you talk about relationships and needs, I kept my mom for the most part out of the loop of what was going on. And I highly depended upon my sisters, which is also very hard. So my personality being one of that many children, I was the second to last. So in our house, you had to be loud to be heard. And so I learned at an early age to just take control. And so I wanted to control my own destiny. I wanted to be heard. So the idea of wanting help, needing help, asking for help, it stuck in my throat. It was hard to ask. It was hard to need. Like I've never really, in my mind, I never really needed anyone. They're always here, but fortunately they know me well, and they all came in. And so you have Diane and Roseanne and Yolanda and Maria and Roseanne, what do we need? And by themselves, they determined who was responsible for what. Who's responsible for mom? Who's responsible for the kids? Who's responsible for me? And so everyone played a role. I had Diane who took it upon herself to be my care navigator, to write down all the regimens, to know when I took what, why I took it. So she was really like the transcriber of my medical history to keep it all on track. And in the meantime, I also, my husband, I'm divorced now, but at the time, I think maybe out of fear, wasn't heavily involved. I think the illness scared him. I think he felt like there was nothing, it was out of his control. It was out of my control. The person who can control anything. And, I think that put a real strain on everything. And so then, I just kind of turned my focus to, okay, I can't control or help him. I have to just figure out how I'm going to help myself and how I'm going to help these three boys. So fast forward. Oh, and by the way, my 6-year-old son is going to have his first music concert. And so he had a solo to sing. And, from what my mom and my sisters told me, he was like, is she going to be here? Is she going to be here? Brandon was very, very intelligent. He spoke when he was 18 months old, like sentences, potty trained himself. It was just this crazy little brilliant kid, but he knows everything. When I was sick, he wanted to know, like, why, what's happening, what's being done about it. And so fortunately, I get out of the hospital on Friday, and I kept telling the doctors, the nurses, I have to be out of here by 5 on Friday. And like, they're telling me I'm not going to survive. And I'm like, I got to be out of here by Friday because I wanted to make his concert. So to end this story, which is a long one, I got to be there and hear him sing. And he said that, he's like, his friends said, your mom's there. And he was like, no, my mom is in the hospital. And they were like, no, your mom's right there. And so I was like, he saw me like just making my way in. That was probably one of the happiest moments of my life, to be able to be there and to see it in his face. I mean, just, it was amazing. So now I'm on my road to recovery, right? Because now I have a diagnosis and now there's treatments for me. Well, as luck would have it, none of them worked except for the steroids.
Damn steroids.
So you gotta love those steroids. I was put on Remicade, on Humira, all of these different treatments that work well for many people. None of them worked for me. And again, the only thing that would work is steroids. Well, I couldn't get off of them. And the doctor would be like, you've got to titrate down. So we would start titrating down. Well, all of these symptoms would come back. And now, just for anyone who isn't familiar with these types of diseases, I lived probably 30 minutes from where I worked. And so my daily routine is to know where every bathroom was on my way to work. I had to learn, you need an extra set of clothes. Someone else always has to be on call. Like all these crazy things, a 30-something-year-old person, you think this is something that when you're 80, you might have to deal with. I'm dealing with incontinence in my 30s. I'm carrying my own diaper bag. Like it's embarrassing, it's humiliating. And I also am now starting to look better. So you don't, like when I looked sick, people saw me differently. When I didn't look so sick, not with my family or my friends who knew, but it wasn't I'll give you an example. I go to the store, I still can't walk, but I look like this. So if you look at me, for people who don't really know what chronic illness is, you think there's nothing wrong with her. Well, I have to use one of those carts where, you sit in them and they and I'm being looked at as if like, that's for sick people. Like, what are you doing on it? So you just deal with all these little things. And some of them, as a chronic illness survivor, you got to disregard them. Like you got to, take in the positives and leave the other negative distractions out, because you can do that to yourself enough. You can't you got to just take the rest of it in stride. But, going through all this, relationships were very important. My son, I couldn't, like, the first time I tried to give myself a shot, it freaked me out. So I go to stick it in my stomach and it stabbed me and I ripped it out. And here goes $500 worth of medicine all over the place because it freaked me out to do it. So then, I called my sister and I'm like, hey, do you think Chris, her husband, who was giving himself shots, I'm like, and I'm in healthcare, I give people shots. I have done this all of my life. I couldn't do it to myself. So because it was like the anxiety of when it was going to come out would panic me. So my brother-in-law came and he started giving me my injections. So it's like, you don't realize all of these different people that come in to provide support. And then you have my son, the 6-year-old. How do I do that? He wanted to be solely responsible for me when I was home. He was like, I learned to do that. So eventually this doesn't work. So none of the treatments are working. And the surgeon and the doctor meet and they're like, okay, there's a time when you have to move past medicine. And now it's time. So I had a colectomy. And so for anyone who doesn't know what it is, my whole colon was taken out. So I have no large intestine, zero, none. Well, actually maybe like this much. So they basically, and this doctor was brilliant, he turned the end of my small intestine into what would be a functioning large intestine. So like and reattached it. I won't go into all the gory details, but that had to happen. Well, with that, I had to have a bag. And, as luck would have it. And so again, Brandon, the oldest, he's involved in all of this. My sisters as well. Again, everyone is playing a role. Who's cooking, who's cleaning, who's taking care of mom, who's making sure all those things take place. I'm still going to work, but Brandon wants to know, what's an ileostomy? He wanted to understand the procedures. So I had to take him the brochures for the surgeries so he can look through them. And I think it was all just so he can better understand how to help me. So I get the ileostomy, and like, I've never dealt with depression before. I've never really been depressed, But what this did was added anxiety disorder. I was so afraid of the bag coming off that I would panic. And as luck would have it, when something like that happens, you're basically just putting glue, like it's like a vacuum bag, and you got to glue it to your stomach. Well, the problem with that is they're pulling your small intestine out. They cut a hole in it because they need the bottom to heal. They don't need it to get infected. Well, it receded. So instead of like coming out, it just leaked. Well, it created 3rd-degree burns on my stomach. So the bag wouldn't stay on. So there was a time, it's funny to me now, but it wasn't funny to me then. So my sisters were in the bathroom and we're figuring out like how to deal with this bag. I mean, they don't make clothes for it either. So like, that's a whole nother issue. So it comes off. And so I can't get it to stay on, and I start panicking. My heart starts beating. I'm almost hyperventilating. And my sister, this was Elena, she was standing beside me, and I'm like, I'm gonna black out. So the next thing you know, because I panicked, I'm out. By the way, I'm half clothed during this process. Well, the next thing you know, they freaked out. They call the fire department or the 911, and I am coming to. And there's firemen or whoever, I'm half naked, carrying me out. Like, how embarrassing. And I was just like, no, I'm not sick. I know exactly what happened. I panicked. But so, yeah, they were taking me out, and my sisters, my mom, everyone was freaked out. I'm like, no. And my kids, of course, they're sitting here watching all of this. I'm like, I just blacked out. It'll be fine. I have to get past this. So that's when I realized, and this is another thing, I think there's stigma with depression or depression medication. I've always been one, if it helps you, you need to do it. There's no shame in needing help in whatever form it comes in. And so I got on Lexapro, and amazingly, I had more ability to manage my anxiety attacks. They lessened it. It kept me steady. Well, through all of that, this bag wasn't working. I had 3rd-degree burns. It would fall off probably 4 or 5 times a day. Oh, and by the way, your insurance only covers one bag over 2 days. I was going through 5 a day because they wouldn't stay on. And because, like, I don't know, like when you have children, like if they get a diaper rash, well, this is essentially what it was, but it was so severe, it was blistered. And so and when you put the glue on, and so here's another thing, you have Brandon, this little 6-year-old climbing up on top of a stool as I'm lying down and applying the glue and like putting it exactly in the right spot. 6 years old. And again, through all of this, you wonder, like, where was my husband? Again, this was so much more that I think than he was mentally capable of handling. And he's a very good guy, but at this time of his life, this was more stress and fear. And so he couldn't do it. So that's why Brandon's like, I got this, Mom, I'll take care of you. So, Brandon kind of took on some of those roles that otherwise he would have been responsible for. So that didn't work out for me. So I'll go back to the surgeon, and I'm like, okay, I can't do this. Like, I am going mental. I go to work, this thing falls off. I'm carrying 15 pairs of clothes. I got to carry wipes. And it was bad. And my friends and coworkers, they just made jokes of it. Oh, and this is going to be kind of gross, but they're like, oh, to eat red velvet cake. We'd like to see what it looks like when it comes out, just to try to, because it's visible. But again, they just try to make me laugh. It was all about just how can we treat her the same? And that's another thing, I think, when you're talking about relationships. When you're sick, you don't want to be treated like you're sick. And so every conversation that we have shouldn't be about your illness. So I appreciated that, when I'm talking to my sisters or I'm talking to my friends, they talk to me like I was normal. Like, hey, how's it going? And then eventually it would come up to, hey, if you need anything, but it was very nonchalant. So I didn't always have to be reminded of what I was going through. I knew they were there. I knew that they cared, but they treated me human. And that meant a lot to me. My sisters, some of them were good with, keeping that straight face, and others were more emotional. So, when they see me, they'd cry, and not because they felt sorry for me, but they were afraid of losing me. And so, we're all pretty tight. So it was, and, I was the first one that really went through that sort of like traumatic experience. And so it was new to all of us. Mm. But they were all still there, and they were amazing. So, you go through this, you still have to work, but you also have to remember that relationships are important. The relationship with my mom, I probably kept her out of the loop more than anyone, because the last thing I wanted is for her to worry. I'm like, you worry about these boys, and, who were her essential life. She's lived with me for 16 years. The moment that my second child was born, she asked if she could live with me. And so, she's always been a part of all of us. And, it was nice to know she raised me, but she was stricter on us though. But so I knew that they were going to be loved. I knew they'll be cared for, and I knew they'd be disciplined. And so, she was doing everything that I would have hoped that I could do. And so I was never concerned about the well-being or safety of the children, because I knew my mom had them, and my sisters were there to support us. But going through it all, my biggest concern was for these kids. Jackson, fortunately, doesn't remember any of it. He was the youngest. Preston remembers a little bit of it. But again, Brandon had to grow up fast. After I got the ileostomy off, I had a huge hole. They couldn't sew it back up. So the nurse comes in, and here, once again, my husband comes in. And so you have to literally pack it, unpack it, clean it, all the stuff. And he's like, I can't do it. And then you've got Brandon. He's like, I got you. And so he's listening, and the nurse is literally teaching Brandon how to care for me, and Brandon took it in stride. And every single day, like clockwork, here he comes. And he's like, all right, Mom, it's time. And he's cleaning it out, like all of the, it was just amazing that it never fazed him. In the front, I think he went through some emotional sadness, but he would never show it to me. And again, I think it's saddening to me that he had to grow up and learn about death so soon. I think it matured him a lot. I think, it might have even altered his personality from maybe what he could have grown up with without fear, without worry. I think even Brandon to this day carries some of that with him, and it saddens me. But he's still a brilliant and sensitive son, but he will make an amazing caregiver. I do joke with them. I'm like, all right, so Brandon took care of me when I was 6. Which one of you got the 80s and 90s? So I make fun of him all the time. I tell my middle child, and I'm like, well, I want my own room. And he was like, well, I'm going to have a master bedroom. I'm like, yeah, but I want that one. He's like, what are me and my wife going to do? And I'm like, well, build 2. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, so can I bring a friend? So I have a good friend. Her name is Trisha. And he was like, well, yeah, but she has to bring her +1. I'm like, what does that mean, a +1? He's like, if I have to bathe you, I can do it, but I'm not bathing her. she needs her own +1. I thought that was hilarious. So to this day, I'll be like, hey, Trisha, remember, you got to have a +1. So anyway, that was a whole lot of story to go through. And, and since then, chronic illness changed my life in many ways. It changed my children's life. It changed my sister's life. It changed Jesse's life. And, I think that we all learned a lot from it. I don't regret any of it. I would have probably done it differently, but I didn't, you don't get to choose what's happening to you when it's happening. But I think what we've also learned is, I have other siblings with chronic illness, and the youngest sister, we call her the little one. She's, when we talk about chronic illness, I think I won the lottery. I think that she didn't. Her ticket didn't want her nothing. She has unspecified connective tissue disorder. And unfortunately, with that came about 7 different disorders. And that helped me know how to talk to her. She went through the similar issues as a new disease came about, as a new disease piled on, she was getting depressed. And again, when people were talking to her, they were wanting to fix. So like her husband was wanting to fix. I would talk to her and I would just say, that sucks. I am so sorry. I'm like, it's not fair. You cry, be angry, but we can't stay there. I'm like, it's all of those things are okay. And I talked to her about, it's okay to be depressed. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to take medication for it. And because she was like, well, I don't want to become dependent on it. I'm like, Maria, do you look at me different for needing to take it? She was like, no. I'm like, then I think you need to give it a try. And so just knowing what I went through, I helped her kind of mentally get through it, because worrying doesn't change it. And in fact, I think it makes it worse. And so you have to, everything is in stride, one step at a time. She was having problems with, again, and I do not recommend this, always researching. And it would just really depress her because she's like, it could be this. I'm like, you don't know what it is. So let's not talk about could be's. So let's talk about, write everything down. This is what you're feeling. This is what you ate. This is what you did. And then you can't hold on to it because it makes it worse. And I know when I had anxiety and I was stressed, my disease was worse. Like your emotional state has so much to do with if it's a good day or a bad day. And like in all the times me going through this, it was mostly anxiety. But when I went to work or when I saw people, I tried to be happy and to talk about the things that are going well or joke about the things that aren't. Because if you don't laugh at it, you're going to cry. And I chose laughter, tears through laughter versus tears through sadness or feeling sorry for myself. And there was a point in time when I would like give myself 5 minutes to feel sorry for myself. I'm like, all right, go ahead and whine, go ahead and cry and feel sorry for yourself, but then you got to snap out of it because you still have children, you still have a mother, you still have siblings, you still have a job, and you can't let your emotional state ruin everything else. Like your disease is your disease. I'm not changing it. I have to cope with it. I have to deal with it. And then I also have to figure out how can I help myself? My sister Maria taught me, she's going through so many struggles, but she exercises. And one of the things that happens when you take a ton of steroids is bone loss. So I experienced 10% bone loss. And so the doctors, and I'm one of those people that, I don't always practice what I preach. And so it was like, you need, now that I have a large intestine, I need to stay hydrated. Like, ask me how many bottles of water I've had today. It's 1. I should be at 8. And so like, there's things I let other things get in the way, but exercise is a huge one. And the only way to regain bone mass is through physical activity, lifting weights and doing the types of things. And so I learned, even when I don't want to do it, that it's best for me to do it. Not only for my physical well-being, but also for my mental well-being. But again, even with that, in all of my life, like from an accountability perspective, I have people that hold me accountable. Exercising, I have 2 really good friends, and we made a commitment together. And he has Crohn's disease. Trisha doesn't have any chronic illness, but together we said, okay, we're going to hold each other accountable. So we're going to exercise together. And what that has helped is, when I feel like I really don't want to go, Trisha's like, we're going. When Randy feels like I really don't want to go, I'm like, oh, we're going. And so we together, we have become healthier than we've ever been through diet and exercise because we're holding each other accountable. What we eat, when we eat it, when we also work together. So, that accountability is really nice. And again, just with my brothers and sisters, they've always, if you want to be held accountable, tell one of them. And, there are times I've regretted it because it was like way too accountable. I'm like, holy cow. I'm like, how did you know I was eating that? So one of the things I'm not allowed to eat is popcorn. So I knew that. And it was just like, oh, a little popcorn is not going to hurt me. I eat some popcorn. I'm like, oh, this new popcorn place just opened near our work. And I loved it. I ate popcorn for 3 days. I ended up in the hospital for a week. my my small intestine where I had the surgery, the shells made it swell up. It wouldn't open. So once again, I'm driving. Oh, here's another one. Where my sisters came in. So I'm sick. And so I never, with the boys, I always wanted to leave them with my mom. So I was like, Mom, you gotta watch the boys. She's like, what's the matter? I'm like, I gotta go to the hospital. Because I couldn't keep anything down. So I'm driving myself to the emergency room and I'm having to pull over to vomit. Well, it just so happens one of my sisters is coming down this side of the highway while I'm this side and she sees me.
You have so many siblings that
I
they're
know.
just
Yeah. So she comes, yeah, they're like everywhere. And so she comes around and she was like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm so sick. I'm in so much pain. This is probably the most pain I've ever felt in my life. It felt like a knife was in my stomach and somebody was twisting it. It was horrible. It was so extreme. It was really unmanageable. And she was like, you can't drive here. I'm like, oh, well, I need to get there. And so again, they get mad. Why didn't you call? And I'm like, I just needed to get there. So we get there. And so immediately they put me on medicine and come to find out, it's the top part of my small intestine where it joins my stomach was shut down, completely closed. I was there for a week, again, steroid city. What the hope was is that it would eventually open up, so because they would have to resection me, and that's the last thing I wanted. So, and this happened to be the second year in a row that I was in the hospital on my birthday. So, but I knew the staff, which is kind of funny. And so then they were like, should we book you again next year? So it was like my weekly resort for my birthday was to be in the hospital for a week. But so again, like you have to take care of yourself. And so when the whole popcorn thing, I knew better. And so it took that extreme of occurrence to happen for me to say, don't be an idiot. But even today, like, let's say I'm at the movies with Brandon, Preston, and Jackson, and they always get popcorn. I'm like, just give me one. So they're like, you can have 3 kernels, no more. So like just to get the desire away. When I'm with Trisha or my siblings, they're like, no popcorn. So everyone knows, like, and so then again, if you want accountability, you tell them. And it is like a small community because everyone knows, like somehow, somewhere, they're everywhere. And they're like, oh, I saw you here. And so we run into each other all the time, but it is an amazing. And I've had a very fortunate life through all of it, because I can guarantee you, I don't care if I have a flat on the road, if any one of them needs something, there has never been a, well, I'm too busy or I can't do it. Someone's showing up. It could be all of them, some of them, depending upon the situation. And so, you know, a lot of people don't have that. And, you know, that makes it so much harder and not having to ask because somebody is always there. So again, you know, I've been very fortunate. And I also wonder, you know, we talked about this earlier, is like, what does everyone else do who doesn't have that many brothers and sisters? Like, you know, growing up, when we were very poor, but, you know, we dealt with it in stride. And every single one of us had a job. So we'd be like, okay, you're the hair washer, you know, for like the little ones. Because, I mean, you have that many kids, you're really spread out. And so we had, you're the feeder, you're the this. So every one of us played a role. And even when I was growing up, and, you know, I got my first job, and, you know, my responsibility was I had to buy the cleaning supplies. So I was responsible for shampoo, conditioner, soap, Tide, those types of things. So because there were so many of us, we all needed to contribute. And so that was all, you know, that was very important to me. I think that those things alone kind of made me who I am today. Like, you know, the struggle that my mom went through. And so unfortunately, like with my father, he wasn't present. He was never a part of our lives. And so when you have that many children and your father basically decides he doesn't want that responsibility, you know, that's tough. And it was tough on my mom. And, you know, I realized, you know, probably if there was something that I regret in life, it's not treating my mother better. And, you know, I was hard on her. And so, you know, I was young and just ridiculous. And I'd think, if, you know, there were times where we didn't have food. So we're sharing a can of green beans, like all huddled around a can of green beans. And so sometimes I'd be so angry at my mom. And, you know, I would think like, why did you have so many children if you couldn't feed us? Like, it's just ridiculous things like that. And so to do, like, now she lives with me, and I'm happy for that. So I can give back in love from the hard time I gave her as a child, never having clothes to go to school, and the whole thing. And so, and one of probably the biggest lessons in life I've ever had is, so, we were on the free lunch programs and all those things, which could be a little bit embarrassing for a child. So I took a class, and one of the teachers, so when you talk about relationships or people that impact your life, Miss Story was her name, and she was my economics teacher. And she said to me one time, like, one of the subjects was, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And I did not understand that. I'm like, Miss Story, what do you mean there's no such thing as a free lunch? And she's like, Clorinda, somebody's paying for it, even if it's not you. Oh my God. From that day forward, I never took something I didn't earn. I got a job. I was the custodian for the school that I went to. And, I'm taking off the gum from, now I understand why they didn't want gum in school. You don't know how many pieces of gum I had to chuck off those desks. It was, I'm buffing the floors and all of that, but it made me realize that nothing in this world is free, and someone is always paying for it. And so, like, one of the biggest values I hope I taught my children is, you've got to give. Like, you can't always be on the taking side. So, like, even within the household, if I'm giving you something, I expect something in return. So nothing is free. And, you got to throw the trash. You've got to, whatever your chores or responsibilities are, you got to go to school and make good grades. I'm like, because none of this is free. Like Brandon, my oldest son, poor kid, one time he wasn't fulfilling what he was responsible for at school. And so he has ADHD, so it's hard. Like, I do too. So you see me jumping all over the place. That's been a struggle all of my life. But for him, he was really just not focusing. So, I basically said, okay, you no longer have a bed. So the only thing I owe you is a meal, clothes, water, and a warm place to sleep. Took away his room and put him on the couch. And I'm like, so you are renting this from me. And the only way you get your room back is if I get paid. How I get paid is passing grades. So you do your job and I will do mine. And so that's kind of what I hope that they've learned from me is you got to give, and also you got to be respectful. Like, you're those teachers that they're teaching you, they don't have to be. They could have chosen another profession, and that's a profession I'd never want. That is far too hard, far too demanding. Like, there's so many people that have to be pleased. It's tough. I'm like, I don't want you to be part of the problem. You have to be part of the solution, Brandon. And part of the solution is doing your job. And I think the younger kids learn from that. So, and when I would do things, we were all together. So me and my mom, Brandon, Preston, and Jackson, we're all in a huddle, and I'm saying, here's what's going on. Brandon made these bad grades, and this is what's going to happen. And I hope you two use this as a lesson, because this is very serious to me. Each of you have a role, and it's your responsibility to fulfill it. Sometimes I'm going to remind you of it. Sometimes I'm going to take things away because you didn't do it. But either way, you get paid by me via a room, via shelter, via milkshakes or a McDonald's. But all of that goes away when you don't do your job. You don't no longer get a paycheck. No more money comes to you. Only what I'm responsible as a mother to give you. I will always give you love. I will always support you unconditionally, but I'm going to hold you accountable to your end of the bargain, and you hold me. And so one of the things that I'm very bad at because of the whole ADHD thing is losing focus. So early on with them, and again, these kids talk a lot. And so they're chatting with me. Let's say that I'm in the kitchen and I'm doing something. So Brandon is talking to me, or Preston is talking to me, but I'm not there. I'm hearing them, but I'm not listening to what they're saying. And so then they would have to call me out. They're like, Mom. And I'd be like, yes. They're like, you're not listening to us. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. So then I have to refocus because, I got all these thoughts and I'm trying to give them time, but I'm really not doing it. So then we've made an agreement. If I lose my thought, or I'm not paying attention, we've got to come back together. And so so I've made a commitment to try to, when I'm with them, just completely focus on that. No telephone, look them in the eye when they're talking to me. I find that that helps me better stay on task and to lose all the other thoughts in my head. Okay, I can worry about work tomorrow. I can, all of these things. The most important thing to me right now is the conversation I'm having with Preston or Jackson or Brandon. And the best way I learned to do it is I've got to stop everything. I cannot multitask if I need to strictly pay attention to one of them, because it distracts, like my mind goes someplace else. So now I've learned when I'm talking to them, I just look them in the eye. I'm like, okay, or I touch them just so they can know that I am here and I'm listening. And so, I think that's very important. And again, when you talk about relationships, touching to me is very impactful and very important. Like when I hug someone, I hug them with meaning. And so, like my children, so I try to teach them that, like I said, you don't pat me. I'm like, treat me like you love me. And so I'll hold on to them, and then eventually I'll get what I'm looking for. But I think that in chronic illness and otherwise, being touched by someone that loves you, there's some healing properties that are involved with that. Like things change within me. I don't know. It's like this warm, fuzzy feeling, and I don't know if it's endorphins or what takes place, but there's power in that. There's power in laughter. Like I think one of the things we talked about, what brings me joy. I love to hear people laugh. There is no greater feeling than to see someone laughing. Like the favorite sounds that come out of my children's voices are laughter, and you would hope that it's not so rare. Like you should find things to laugh about, even if it's at yourself for a time. But laughter brings healing, and it really brings joy to me. I don't care if I'm not even in the room and I hear someone laughing. I want to know what's happening. It like makes me feel good to know that people are enjoying life and enjoying each other. So I talked a lot. I hope I didn't get off track.
No, I'm now speechless because I'm just so thankful for everything that you have brought up today. Because first of all, I want to be you as a mother when I'm older.
And it's hard. It's like that's a difficult thing. To realize you're raising a human.
Yeah.
That is just nutty in itself. Like there is a human life, and it's going to be one of the scariest things you've ever done.
Oh yeah.
You,
oh yeah.
It's like when they're babies. No, they can't eat without you. They can't move. They can't. It was scary. And then you get the groove of it. But the first time we brought Brandon home, Jesse and I looked at each other and we were like, what do? We had no idea what we were supposed to do. Like, do we take him out of the seat? Like, where do we put him? Like everything was new. But so I can tell you learn.
Yeah, I feel like I say this often that I'm one of the least naive pre-mothers that exist. Like I plan on having a family, but I'm not naive in that I know that I'm not going to know, or it's not going to be what I prepare for at all. My life is going to do a 180. Like I'm aware of how little control I will feel I have when that comes. And I think knowing that I won't know is somewhat reassuring to me. It's
and it's okay. And to just know that it's okay to not know.
Exactly.
Exactly. There's books and people out there that you can ask. And by the way, if you use the wrong product or wrap the blanket the wrong way, it's going to be okay.
Is it okay?
Don't stress yourself out about the tiny things like that, because I did, and it would get too much. So yeah, it's okay. They're going to be all right.
I got a pediatric husband, so he can swaddle.
Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah.
I don't want to swaddling issues, but there's issues on the horizon. I love that you also brought up, first of all, you've used the word human many times, which, as you know, I love that word. And the first time you really brought it to light was talking about Jackson and how he was less than a year old, right?
Yeah.
Less than a year old when
I was at the hospital in March, and he would turn 1 in July 23rd.
Wow. Yeah. So he was so young. And
Mhm.
even for Brandon and Preston, like they were still very young as well, and you can get a sense of their personalities, but you don't know who these humans are going to turn into,
Yeah,
and they are. They're their own humans, and I'm personally a very big believer in nature and nurture. It is both. You
yeah.
do not know who this being is going to be that you give birth to or adopt even
Mhm.
at a young age. So it's I think it's brilliant that you acknowledge that. And as I mean, every time you brought it up to me, the writing the letter to them, I just
Yeah, it
ah,
was hard. I mean, to this day, I'll pull it out every once in a while and read it.
oh, you have it.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
So I had this book. And so in this book, there was the chapters of that my sister dictated all the things that was happening. So to this day, you can see, okay, she took this at this hour. At this hour, she needs to do this. Every time the nurse came in, so I have the whole book of everything that took place in that hospital,
Wow.
including the children's letters.
Your siblings are efficient. They
And again, and the nice thing about it is everyone knew their role.
yeah,
So
that's a big
Diane is like, so Diane is the one that doesn't, she doesn't panic. She's not gonna get emotional. She'll do what needs to happen. And so that's why she was the one in the hospital. Because if there's news to be had, she can take it. And so she's like, okay, immediately took on that role. Then I had my sister Roseanne, who said, okay, I'm gonna take care of, and Maria, I'll take care of the kids. Then I had Liz come down, and she lives in Oklahoma, and she's like, well, when you get out of the hospital, and she's like, I'll stay with you. So when I got out of the hospital, Liz was there for 2 weeks. And she was like, she was doing everything that needed to happen. I'd have Elena come over. Everyone wanted to get involved. Yolanda was the one that saw me on the side of the road and transported me to the emergency room, but she thought I was a little crazy for going on my own. But we all played a role. And so it was amazing. And again, every one of them on their own decided, okay, I'll do this, I'm going to do that. Maria's good at managing. And so she's like, okay, I'm going to keep everyone on task. So the kids have to be at school at this time and make sure their homework is done. And so again, all of them came together. And my kids love their aunts. And so my brothers don't live close, so they weren't really a part of all of this transaction. But yeah, to this day, they can go spend the night at any one of their homes. They're all treated like children. And so yeah, it's an amazing, and again, very fortunate. I don't know how people don't have 12 brothers and sisters.
yeah. Yeah, unfortunately most of us don't. So what about what didn't work?
Man. So, I think one of the things that we have to realize is not only as a patient, but as a caregiver, as a provider, is there's no cookie cutter disease and there's no cookie cutter solution. So one of the things that didn't go well is when I had this bag. So, before you get it, they show you all these beautiful videos of, these men and women who are out there swimming and having a good old time, horseback riding. And it was like the perfect scenario. So I'm like, oh, this is gonna be a breeze. I could easily do this.
Yeah, that's me, biggie.
So I think, like, don't always paint the pretty picture. So this is what we hope it's like. This is what it could be like. So in my mind, I was not mentally prepared. And that was the hardest part. Like, the physical stuff is the physical stuff. But if you don't have it mentally, everything else is going to fall apart. And that's where it fell apart with me, is because I'm expecting to, horseback ride and go swimming, and I can't even keep the bag on to go to work. And so I think that somewhere there's a breakdown in the education on disease. I think that it's not always pretty. And I think that we should prepare patients or people for the what ifs. This is the best outcome. These are the what could happen. So at least maybe mentally, I would have had a pathway to say, okay, I hope it's this, but I can prepare for this. I wasn't prepared for this. And I was like emotionally and mentally shut down. I had zero control. I didn't know what to do. And again, it was humiliating. There's all these different emotions. And so that's the whole feeling sorry for yourself. You're like, in my mind, I had to tell myself, get over it. Like, the people who love you and care about you, that doesn't matter to them. So stop, you can't care about what the whole world is going to think, and just be prepared for it. So, like one of the things I say is, I always have a to-go bag. Like I always keep an
Oh,
extra,
go back.
like a diaper bag, just in case. And so, there's so many times. And so at work, again, I was so fortunate to work. I worked at Good Days. What better place to discover these chronic illnesses than this one? Everyone was supportive. Like they knew, like if I'm running to the bathroom, what took place. And it was like I had so many coworkers and friends there that would come in there like, do you need help? Like, do you need me to get you anything? Everyone was supportive. I was late to meetings at times because, I had to stop at every bathroom in that 30-minute drive. And no one, like when I walked in, there was no question. Everyone knew. And so they're like, oh, we'll catch you up. So I've always been supported. And again, I don't know how other people do it, because I could not have done it on my own. I don't know where I would have been, but I'm sure it would have been an emotional wreck. And I don't know how I could have really been there and stayed strong for these boys.
So I'm sure there were really, I mean, you've clearly had a lot of support, and I'm glad that you recognize and are grateful for that. But I'm sure at the same time, there are still lots of breakdowns in relationships.
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, one of them was my marriage.
Right?
That was difficult. And, we were still young. And when you say in sickness and in health, you don't really know what that means until something happens. And unfortunately for us, it happened so fast. It was like, we have a third child. That was enough, right? Now I'm bringing in another life in, and I was generally, the one mostly responsible for like the caregiving and, the taking them where they needed to go and those types of things. And then all of a sudden I'm sick. I don't know what's wrong with me, and he's having to take the role of mother, father, caregiver. And it was, I think, it scared him. And, I've seen this throughout my life. I've been in healthcare all my life, seeing it happen to families all the time, where a catastrophic illness takes place, and it can be the breakup. And that was the beginning of the end for our relationship. When I had to have, when Brandon decided he wanted to take on the role of trying to be that caregiver, but that was a lot. And so that's another thing. So you're already having all these emotional things, and now you've got this huge relationship that affects not only me, but my children, your aunts, uncles, cousins, and that's falling apart. So yeah, it was pretty crazy with that. And and also, even like with the siblings who all wanted to take care of me, everyone had their own idea of like what medication route I should take. So, one sister was like, you should go the holistic route. Well, you should do that. And I'm like, I can't do them all. And, it was so yeah, there was good and bad, but it's certainly very hard when you're in a relationship, and you're generally the one in control, and you're the strong one, and then that goes away. You have to, you're not the same person anymore. I wasn't the same person, and Jesse wasn't the same person. And we have a great relationship today. And we talk about that time, and he was like, yeah, I'm really sorry. Like he's never really understood. And I think again, it was just fear of how real this was. The reality of death, the reality of raising 3 children on your own. All of those dynamics were scary. And it didn't work out for us. And so, Jesse, and it was my doing. So I asked Jesse for a divorce, and, I then became a single mom. And, and it was very difficult for him in the beginning. And so he didn't come around a lot because he was still trying to figure it out. Like, where did it all go wrong? And is there, what's the next step? And so, that was another talk about growing up fast for these 3 boys. And so, they had no idea, had no understanding of what. And so one of the questions one of my sons asked me is like, Mom, I don't understand. I've never heard you argue.
Mm.
I said, that's true, but when's the last time you've seen us hug?
Ooh. Yeah.
And so it was hard. And I remember again, Brandon had the brunt of all of it because he was the oldest. And he was, when we got divorced, Jackson was 2, which makes Preston 5 and Brandon 8. And he was just like, this is the word. And he liked to write things down. Like he that's how he's emotionally processed. And he was like, when we're telling him, he's like, I got to write this down. This is the worst day of my life. I've got to write this down. And I said, Brandon, I'm not going to let you do that. I said, I'm not going to let you do that, because if this is the worst thing that ever happens to you, then you are going to have led a damn good life. And by the way, your father loves you and I love you. We will always be here for you unconditionally, anytime. I said, but I am not going to let this break you.
Wow.
So then, then Jesse and I had to get together. I'm like, how are we going to do this? We have to ensure that we're always kind to each other. And again, we always were. It wasn't about that. And so, I'm like, you've got to be there for these kids. And so one time Jackson asked me, and this is tough, especially because I'm the one that asked for this. Jackson said, Mom, why do you get to see us more than Dad? How is that fair? And I said, you know what, Jackson, it isn't. You're absolutely right. But I'm going to call your dad. We're going to call your dad right now. And we're going to tell him exactly what you just said. And I said, then the reason we're going to do that is because he is always there. We don't have an agreement where you get him on this day and it's on this. If you want to go with your dad, go with your dad. If you want to be with your mom, be with your mom. So, and we're like 10 minutes down, we live very close to each other. And so I needed Jackson to be reassured, not only by me, but by Jesse, to say, I am 10 minutes from you. If you want to come over here, you want to stay over here, you want to go do anything, you call. And, and I'm right there. And so, it was interesting how each one of these kids processed it differently. But even today, so last night for dinner, it was me, Brandon, Preston, Jackson, and Jesse, all getting together and eating. And so, Jesse's a very good friend of mine. And so we've done well with ensuring that not only do our children know if there's any failure we did as parents, the one thing I never wanted it to be is they need to know they're loved. And so my kids, I tell them 14 times a day that I love them. And one of the things that I make sure of at night, and they know this. And so even Brandon, who's 19, and by the way, he's 6'3", 230. He's giant. And I'm 5'3". So there's like a whole thing. And so they all come in before they are going to bed. And so each of them have different, Brandon doesn't have a bedtime, but Preston does and Jackson does. So Jackson's the first one to come in, and so we sit down, we hug each other, we chill each other, we love them. I'm like, I love you. And so Jackson will hang out with me, and so I make him sit on my lap. I know that's crazy. And so I'm like, I remember when you were this small. And one of the things I used to do with Jackson is he would hug me and he was like, what if I never let you go? I'm like, well, I guess you're going to work with me. I guess you're gonna have to be school. So we would go through that. And so to this day, he'll say that sometimes. He'll be like, what if I never let you go? And so then Preston, we have the same routine. Preston comes in around 11 and so Preston will be like, put out his hand. And I said, Preston, we don't shake hands, we hug. And so he knows that. This is kind of like the way we always start. So he puts his hand out. I'm like, sit in my lap. He's like, really? I'm like, come on. I said, there's going to be one day when it changes, and that's going to be when I'm sitting in yours. Until that time, this is how it works. And so then I'll hug him and I'll kiss him on both cheeks, and he kisses me on both cheeks. And then he'll say, I love you. And then Brandon. So then eventually Brandon will come. And it's the same thing. But Brandon now, he wants me to stand up. He's like, I get a better hug if you're standing up. So now I'll stand up, and he just picks me up and makes it real. And so yeah, it's lovely. But these kids know they're loved, and they all have struggles. Brandon's been, this whole seclusion and keeping the kids inside, that's had a mental impact on them. Okay. And that's an emotional thing that when you can't see friends and all of these things and you're a teenager, that's tough. And so I try to ensure how are you feeling? And so it's not one of those questions that like when you're walking down the hall and you're like, hey, how's it going? This is real. I'm like, I want to know your emotional state. Like, are you depressed? Are you anxious? Is there anything you're concerned about? And like, how are your grades? Is there anything you want to discuss? And so one of the things I've always taught them as well is I don't like to be lied to. So when I ask you how your grades are and you're like, oh, they're good, and they're not, you're losing trust. And I'm like, the easiest thing to do is lose trust. And the easiest thing to keep is trust. So you just, even if it's bad, you can tell me. I'm like, at what point in any of your lives, and these are conversations that I've had over the last couple of years, have I ever harmed you? And they're like, never. I'm like, then why would you be afraid to tell me? I said, because let me tell you something, nothing makes me more angry than me asking you a question, you lying, and me finding out 2 months later.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, I know it's scary to tell me I missed a test, I didn't study for it, and I failed, but you're better off because guess what? We can fix that. I can help you fix that. I'm like, I have ADHD. I know what it feels like to not have turned something in. And so there are coping mechanisms or ways that we can get past it. But if you can't tell me you need help, then who can you tell? I assure you, it's unconditional. I will support you no matter what mistakes are out there. I'm like, I can't count the number of mistakes I've made in my life. I said, but the part about mistakes is you learn from them and do better. So if you keep doing the same thing over and over again without trying to make a better impact or take a new approach, then I'm going to be upset. But if you bring something to me, you're like, this happened, and whether, I don't care what it is. I had a 0, I was speeding and I got a ticket, like, all of these things that you do with all these different ages of children. I'm like, tell me, and then we can fix it. If you need help, if you need to see a counselor, if there are things that you feel like you cannot tell me, we'll get you to a counselor. I'm like, but what you don't want to bottle it in, and you don't want me to find out after the fact. And so, those again, some like children learning moments, and then, dealing with each of them differently. But, that was the biggest thing for me with them, and all of that is let me know in advance, tell me when it happens. And that's even with work. Like, I hate knowing after the fact. Like, I hate finding out. Just tell me, because we can get through this process so much quicker. And without, like with my boys, without them being afraid of what's going to happen. I'm like, what's the worst that's going to happen? You can't use your video game? Like, I said, we're going to work through it. I'm like, is there going to be consequences? Absolutely. But the consequences are going to be far more severe if I find out 2 months later. So you choose which one you want, but I can assure you, this is not the one. I'm like, you guys know that from experience. So make it this one. And so, yeah, I know it's completely off, but sorry.
No, it's all, actually, I find it all related. I mean, it's clear that communication, like proper communication, is of utmost importance to you, which I couldn't agree more with.
It is, and it's hard. Like, just like, even if when we're interacting, you can't assume that somebody knows what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I like the open, and so one of the things I hate the most is like the text and all that. I like conversation. I like picking up the phone. And so even here at work, one of the things I miss the most is the way that we had to move offices, but in a previous office where I sat, I could hear everything. So one of the things I love the most is if I heard somebody struggling on a phone call or didn't know what to do, I would get out of my desk and I would listen to the conversation, then I'd ask them if I can take it over. So then I would talk to the person on the line, and we would, if they needed assistance, I would work through that with them. And then afterwards, I would sit with them, and I'm like, okay, I said, I would just discuss. I'm like, I know why you were confused. You probably have never come across this before. And so, I would walk through it. But one thing I don't like is if somebody is struggling with something and you're like, oh, look at the manual. Oh, you've already been taught that. Well, obviously they're struggling with something. So I'm always big on communicating. So don't assume that you know what the issue is until you've actually discussed it. Like, have a real conversation.
Absolutely. I'm thinking once we publish this episode, I'm going to save this in my bookmarks to revisit for myself. Honestly, You have provided so many words of wisdom tonight. And, the one that I would like to go back to, and this may be a bit open-ended, but if you could provide some words of wisdom to people who don't have big communities, to people who don't have supportive family members, who maybe like right now are in the throes of a relationship that's not working because their partner just does not understand and is scared, or they're in a situation where they just don't have family members or friends who understand what's going on. What are some insights you can give? I know you didn't, well, one of those situations you had, one of those that you didn't.
No, yeah. But so what I found, especially now, like working at Good Days, and we get so many different calls for needs are different. It's not always financial. And so there are so many resources available. Don't be afraid to use them. And so when I was in the first going through it, I don't know if the word embarrassed or I didn't want to ask for help, but there's communities out there. There's organizations like Good Days. There's organizations like if you have multiple sclerosis or Crohn's disease, there's advocacy groups out there that can connect you with human interactions. There are places all across this country in which you can get online and talk to communities for people like you. And, those are nice because, some of the things that you're going through, you might feel like you're the only one, or you might just want to know that it's normal. Like, I think some of the biggest fears I had when I was sick is, did this happen to somebody else? Like I would panic, is this something new? But it was nice to be able to go online to a community and say, hey, this just happened. Anyone else experience that? So even that sort of connection is something. But I would highly recommend reaching out, even your provider's office. They know, especially if you're dealing with a chronic illness and with a specialist, they know the many different groups that are out there that can provide support. But don't be afraid to pick up the phone, and don't be afraid to talk to someone. And, there's also counseling. Do not hesitate to get it. I needed it. I needed somebody to talk to for many different reasons, not only for emotionally, so I don't just break it down, but also I wanted to talk to them about work and how to manage it. How do I get past my ADHD and be able to focus? There are so many times in my life where I needed to talk to someone, and it's not always I needed a medical care. I just needed an ear. And so I think that it's important. Don't be afraid to connect. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. It can be you can feel very vulnerable when you're doing something like that. But if you're in the right community, it's going to be welcome. And in the end, calling Good Days or Cancer Support Community or other entities like us, we want to help. And we may not always have the answers, but at least we know how to navigate and know how to try to do the connection. But I think I think that support is needed, even if it's only a chat line or a phone call to a counselor. But having a sense of community, I think it's important, again, just so you can feel like you're not going crazy.
Yeah, and I'd actually like to quote you from earlier tonight because I wrote this down. There's no shame in needing help, no matter what form it comes in.
That's correct. Yes.
Very well said. Very well said. Well, we do have to wrap up. Though I'm kind of thinking maybe we should just make this multiple episodes. I would really like that. You know what I would love to actually bring up again?
Yeah.
Behind you. Because I'm actually trying to remember what you said last time.
Yeah, I love them. So I'm going to put this up.
So this is for video, but you'll also have to describe it for.
I will. So basically what you have is you have different people, and they're either, it appears in which that they're climbing a wall. And for me, this is just a continued reminder that anytime I approach someone, you never know where they're at in their journey. And so when you're looking at this, you look like, oh, everyone's climbing, and some are further down, some are further up, when in reality, they might already have crossed the mountain and are on the way back down. So again, it's my constant visual to say, you've got to meet people where they're at, and you don't know exactly which approach they're on. Are they climbing up the struggle? Are they dealing with it? Or are they coming back down from it? So that's what I like to do. And then jokingly, what I say when people ask is, you notice that none of them have dresses on. It's because the women have already crossed. That's my, yeah. But that's, again, like just a constant reminder of you don't know where someone's at. So meet them at their level.
It's a really powerful display and message. Thank you for putting that up there. Thank you, Clorinda, for being you in all the ways that you are you, as a leader, as a mother, honestly, as a wife. Really, like, I commend you for how you stood up for yourself in that way, as you are a self-advocate in that way. I'm also glad that you guys are so close now too. But I'm very proud of that. And as a patient, as a sibling, really, I greatly admire you. I will be re-listening to this episode myself many times.
Well, I certainly appreciate you having me. I love talking to you. It's, it's, life is important. Like, you only live once. And, there's ups and downs, as you can see, again, from people behind me. And there's always community. So thank you, Ava, for reaching out. And I appreciate our friendship, and I appreciate everything that you stand for and you're doing on behalf of the chronic disease community.
Thank you. And oh, you know what? Actually, there's one last thing. Sure. I wanted you to, we're going to post stuff about Good Days, but is there any quick thing that you want to say about Good Days? A call to action on what you want people to know?
Something that's coming up is real quick is July 10th. So July 10th, I think you might have heard me talk about Chronic Disease Day. And so it signifies that 7 out of the top 10 deaths annually are due to chronic illness. And the saddest part about that is most of them are preventable. And so, one of the things I want to say is, we'd love for you to come to our website and show support for that day. And what we would love to do, so 90% of the healthcare spend today is on preventable illness. And the biggest, it's crazy. And so our call to action is help us change the number. Change the number. And
weekend March 10th.
Yes, yeah. And so, there are many things where genetic plays a role. But there are so many things that we can do, even when you have a disease that's not preventable. Diet and exercise. I know that sounds cliche. Drinking water. Like, that's my biggest struggle, is you have to drink water. And again, it's not something that everyone can do just overnight, but it's small steps. On the commercial breaks, get up and walk around. Like, there are so many things we can do to take care of ourselves. And so, one of the things that I talk about is, like, when somebody is diagnosed with cancer, the first thing they do is they go to the doctor and say, what can I do? Like, get me treatment, I want to get well. But when we're suffering from obesity or diabetes because of or smoking, we know how to fix that. There are steps that we can take, get on a patch or do different things, drink more water, eat healthier, try to get more steps in to ensure that we have happy, healthier lives. And again, I sometimes am not the practicing what I preach, but it's another important thing is, like growing up, like in my mom's era, exercise wasn't really a thing. Like, I can't recall anyone really saying, oh, I'm going to go for a run, or I'm going to do this. It wasn't something that we were taught. So one thing that's important to me, and like my way of trying to contribute to this number, is teaching my children. So they see me exercising. My oldest son, I do Orange Theory, and so he's joined Orange Theory, and so he's wanting to do that. And the younger two, they get exercise at school, but teaching those types of traits at an early age, so then it becomes like breathing. So no one needs to remind you to breathe, and so making better choices. So for example, you eat the cheeseburger, forget the fries. Like, just small things that can make a huge difference. So again, join us on 7/10 in recognition of chronic disease awareness and what we can do as a country to lower the number.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The Human Care Podcast is part of the Invisible Not Broken podcast network, a network that includes several chronic illness, disability, and health-related podcasts, including Explicitly Sick, hosted by Monica Michelle, Discomfort Zone, hosted by Jason Herderick, and of course, the original Invisible Not Broken podcast. We absolutely love feedback. Love, 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 love feedback. And connecting with you one-on-one or within our Invisible Not Broken podcast community. So please reach out to us anytime. We're open to topics, critique, you name it. This is a podcast created by us for you. You can find information about all of our network podcasts, community, and how to contact us all on invisiblenotbroken.com. You can also find us on social media platforms through the handle Invisible Not Broken and humancare_podcast. That's it, everyone. Thanks for listening and being a part of our mission to transform healthcare into human care.